Kia ora everyone, welcome back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've had the government announce what parts of the country are moving into what different traffic lights under the COVID-19 protection framework from the 3rd of December. Most of the country, of course, going to orange, all of the South Island, but we've seen the likes of Auckland, Northland and a fair amount of sort of the mid-North Island heading into the red traffic light to start with. A lot of that seeming to be around the lower vaccination rates and the challenges around the possible healthcare system in those areas being able to cope with the COVID outbreak. This is going to have a huge impact on tourism, isn't it, over the summer period?
Yeah, there will be a reluctance from people to travel. I mean, obviously, you've got short time spans in terms of actually planning anything now over the next few weeks before Christmas and the New Year period hits. So that's going to count against people actually getting out. There'll be a reluctance from people to get out and mix, particularly with the risks around Auckland is, of course, spreading out and I guess the perceived risk around COVID spreading with them and the chances of, camping next to someone at Ohope and they're an Aucklander and you might end up with COVID. That sort of thing, just in people's minds, I think will just weigh on some of the usual willingness to get out and travel that we have seen previously. Perhaps not so much in the South Island, of course, where everyone's at orange. But again, we know that Aucklanders do like to travel to particularly somewhere like Queenstown as well. So there will still be some risks around there. And I think overall it will just be a bit more of a subdued period than we certainly saw last summer, of course, when domestic tourism was picking up not all the slack, but a fair amount of the slack that had been left by the whole from international tourism. What other economic impacts do you see in terms of the shift that we're going through at the moment?
I think there is certainly still that risk over how much spending we get out over summer, given we've got higher inflation coming forward, given we've got interest rates starting to move up. All of that, I think, is going to make some households much more cautious on that discretionary spend. And let's be clear, tourism is definitely discretionary spend. I think the other challenge you've got is given that, like you said, that short time frame before Christmas, so far I've talked to very few people that had firm summer plans. And I think with the red restrictions in place in some areas, it is going to force some families, some households to go, well, perhaps I won't travel to those areas, not because I actually think there's a huge amount of risk, but just because I don't know exactly what I'm going to be confronted with, what changes might happen when I go on holiday. And a new acronym that seems to have sprung up, HOGO, the hassle of going out, I think is going to become much more prevalent as we head forward. People going, oh, look, am I going to have to worry about, if there will be a seat at the place I go to, if there are those tighter capacity venue restrictions at the red traffic light and similar. I think that is going to prompt more people to possibly stick much closer to home, but also when the option is, do you go to a red or an orange area? Orange certainly seems to be a more preferential focus. The other challenge, I think this is a specific one for Te Tai Tokerau, Northland, if there are border restrictions in place, that is going to, or even the hint of border restrictions in some parts of the region not being accessible for some travellers, that's just, I think, going to put pay to any ideas from some quarters of going there. Again, the hassle of can I make it to the campground or not? If it's too hard, if it's put in the too hard basket, I think you are going to see people opt for other opportunities. Heading forward, though, as well, I think there are questions around, well, what does the future look like under this protection framework, right? I mean, do you have any idea how anyone seems to move to green, given that, parts of Wellington, for example, no COVID cases, very high vaccination rates, even the South Island, a lot of parts of the South Island have had no cases in recent memory. And again, you sort of wonder, well, what is the criteria ever going to look like to get a place to the green traffic light?
Yeah, I think the government at the moment, I mean, they're taking, again, a cautious approach as they have done through most of the pandemic, and that is admirable. But I think looking at the summer period, they are worried about just the amount of potential travel that does go on and mixing of people between regions that you probably get more so during, December and January than you might in other times of the year. And so by moving into the framework at this point in time, they are not wanting to sort of ease off all restrictions and move to green, even though there are areas such as, you say, much of the South Island where you haven't had COVID, where you've got vaccination rates which, first doses are all above 90% apart from the West Coast, and second doses are pushing pretty close to that in some of those regions as well. Look, I think when you come to the review in mid-January that the Prime Minister has talked about, that will be the stage where you do start to possibly see some regions moving into green. Despite, she hasn't been clear about it at this stage, but I think you will have most of the country with second doses up at 90% by that point in time. time, and that does start to open the door, assuming we don't have a spread of cases happening in the intervening 6 weeks or so. If you don't have much COVID through the South Island, for example, then I could envisage many of the regions there moving into green, and indeed potentially sort of the Wellington area as well, maybe even other parts of the North Island if COVID numbers remain relatively low. Of course, all of that's premised on the conditions staying largely as they are at the moment in terms of the virus. We've got a new variant coming through internationally, though, Omicron, and causing a lot of concerns particularly through Europe, and many countries reacting in terms of closing their borders. And of course, we've seen within the last week the government making announcements about how they plan to move forward with MIQ and border restrictions into the early part of next year. Some of those must be a bit under threat now, given the latest variant we've got.
You certainly would have thought so, and I think the challenge so far is that this new variant has come on scene very, very quickly. You know, it was only really a week ago that we heard of it for the first time. It immediately became a variant of concern. It skipped the variant of interest stage that you've seen of previously, the likes of the Lambda variant and what have you. I think that the difficulty as well is we just simply don't know at the moment. Some early indications seem to highlight that it could be much more transmissible, but perhaps in vaccinated populations less hardcore, if you will, in terms of the effects it seems to have from a healthcare system point of view. But given we've only really got a week's worth of information, it does seem to be a bit early. What I have been surprised at is how the sort of economic markets have responded. You saw an immediate reaction on the Friday that it was announced, markets tumbling, oil prices fell $10 a barrel, the largest sort of day intraday change and I think since COVID-19 really first appeared on scene. It did seem to be that the world took a bit of a collective breath when the announcement of Omicron was announced, and I think what you have seen since then is the market springing back up a little bit, going, maybe we overcooked our response, maybe we sort of were too threatened. Now we actually need to wait and see what the implications are. But certainly we have seen a number of countries respond quite quickly in terms of border changes. Australia's pushed back its expected reopening by at least a few weeks, and will continue to assess. Other parts of the world have put a number of parts of Africa onto their high risk or don't fly, don't travel list, remembering that that's a little bit harsh on Africa, given we've now got cases across Europe and what looks like Southeast Asia as well. The difficulty, I think, is Israel has completely closed their borders. If this is the response we continue to see, if those fears do pan out to be true, then we could well see 2022 in a very difficult position as well from a travel and reopening point of view. The other question I guess I have is it does highlight that if we don't start to get vaccines out across the world, we could be dealing with these variants for a while. We might well, make our way through what sounds like a pretty deadly COVID Omega sort of option, and then we've got to find a whole new naming convention. I think, star constellations are the next cab off the rank for the WHO. All of that, though, suggests, that this thought that 2020 was a hardcore year of trying to deal or understand COVID. 2021 was more about getting our recovery pathway in order, and then 2022 was executing that recovery. That sort of thinking, I think, is in jeopardy. What do you make, Gareth, of not only the variant but the pathway forward for the global and domestic economy with these variants continuing forward, with the uncertainty that still remains?
Yeah, and that uncertainty is the biggest problem that businesses face around the world at the moment. You just can't plan, a month in advance, let alone 6 months or 12 months in terms of your decision making. And it does really impact, as you've seen it on the stock market. I think there's a bit of herd mentality which comes out there as well. But there are underlying concerns there just about, expectations had been we were returning to normal and getting on top of things, but that's clearly not necessarily the case now. And so I think, hanging over 2022, a heck of a lot of uncertainty still. And ultimately, that does weigh on growth. We've come through it really well from a New Zealand point of view so far, both last year and I think essentially this year as well. Our health response has worked out well in both cases, but there's still a lot more water to go under this bridge yet.
Absolutely. And look, we'll continue to assess where the likes of the traffic lights go if we ever move to green, and certainly maybe a recap on our own travel plans over summer, as well as what the future variants of COVID-19 start to look like. And I'm going to go off and learn the Greek alphabet. We'll update on everyone on all of that and more, I hope, on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.